Please take your seats. The show is about to begin.
Welcome aboard.
Give it up for senior deals reporter, Madison Mills.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I know you're all staring at the sunset and not me, so go ahead and take it in. And every time you look at the sun, think about subscribing to the Axios Markets newsletter. That's the newsletter I write every single morning. But really excited to have you guys here tonight. And Axios has a huge week here in New York City, events popping up at UNGA and Climate Week, so be sure to go to our website for all of those programming details. We've got some great conversations for you here tonight, followed by cocktails and a networking reception. We hope you'll stick around for that. But first, I am thrilled to kick the evening off with the New York Stock Exchange President, Lynn Martin.
Please welcome.
Thank you so much.
What a view.
I know.
Wow.
Again, they're not going to listen to anything
No,
we say,
not at
but
all.
it's fine. We'll get great photos out of the evening. Lynn Martin, thank you so much for making the time for
Thanks for
Axios.
having me.
Really appreciate it. So a week ago today, President Trump posted on Truth Social to announce that he was asking the SEC to cut the amount of corporate earnings that happen annually in half. Right now, we do them 4 times a year, as you all know. He wants it to be twice a year. He's asking the SEC for approval. You have not commented publicly on this. Do you support the president's push for less corporate earnings?
I think what's really important, and I know Chair Atkins weighed in on this topic on Friday, is to get to the underlying issue that both President Trump and Chair Atkins have identified. And that is 1996, there were 7,600 public companies, and today we're about 4,500 public companies. And it's not as though there isn't a huge pipeline of private companies. There are about 10,000 private companies, of which around 1,500 of them are at unicorn status. But yet they're not going public. Why are they not going public? And that is really what the president, President Trump, and Chair Atkins are getting at. So that issue. How do we get more companies public quicker? There are a lot of different ways that that could be approached. There isn't a silver bullet. Clearly, having less prescriptive reporting requirements is one mechanism. That could be moving from quarterly to semi-annual. It could be changing the amount of disclosures. I mean, you see that we moved away from some financial-driven disclosures under the previous administration to more qualitative types of disclosures. So I think it's going to be a combination of a variety of factors focused on being less prescriptive about what gets reported, when it gets reported. However, you still need to balance the transparency requirements that investors are going to have on public companies. So I ultimately think the fact that it's a choice, someone wants to report semi-annually, someone wants to report quarterly. Is there a different regime for companies who have just IPO'd or are public for a certain amount of time versus the longer term, the people that have been public for 100 years? Are there different requirements depending on the growth mechanisms you're investing in the business? As long as there's transparency, I think that could be one of the solutions. However, I do think it's multifaceted and all gets back to the challenge of how do we get more companies public in this market.
It sounds like you support it in theory, but maybe not as prescriptive as every company across the board does earnings twice a year.
I think it needs to be up to the company. There are still going to be companies that report quarterly because that's what their investors expect of them. And if you look at the foreign private issuers, for example, they have to report semi-annually today, but they report quarterly. I think you still will see companies report quarterly, or at least give some transparency into the key performance indicators quarterly.
And it's interesting you talked about the challenges of getting private companies to go public. I wonder what you think about NVIDIA today announcing a $100 billion investment into OpenAI. Are these big tech companies in a way competitors to the public markets because they can give private companies more liquidity? Well,
I think it's more of the ecosystem. There's always been investment from strategic investors in private companies when they're in the hyper-growth stage. But the amount of capital that's being raised in private markets, there were rumors of X and XAI raising a huge round. I think it was 10 billion was the rumor on Friday from your more traditional bank forms of capital investors or venture or private equity. That is a type of deal that more typically would have tapped the public markets to get a $10 billion deal. And if I look at OpenAI and NVIDIA, it seems like that's more of a strategic partnership as opposed to a capital infusion.
And I know, of course, I talk to a lot of retail investors who are really foaming at the mouth to get any opportunity to invest in an OpenAI.
Yeah.
Have you spoken with them about going public and going public through the New York Stock Exchange?
You know, we've talked to companies all the time that are in pipeline, the largest and most robust, but even some of the smallest ones. Our job at the New York Stock Exchange is not just to get companies to list on the New York Stock Exchange, is to get companies to the public markets and be successful in the public markets. This American experiment works when companies are successful because they raise the capital they need to change the world. They deliver returns to shareholders. It's a diverse group of shareholders. It's not just funds, long-only funds, hedge funds. It's retail. It's mom and pop putting their retirement savings into these companies. So we want them all to succeed, but they need to be equipped to succeed in the public markets. And that's our job, to give them the tools.
And when you speak to the likes of an OpenAI, what are the headwinds they're bringing up? What are the obstacles they're bringing up to going public? What's the delay?
A lot of these companies right now are in hyper-growth mode and hyper-product development mode. They aren't focused on all of the scaffolding, if you will, that is required for a public company. They just want to create product, and when they feel that they're at the end of their product strategy, then they typically will go.
So then going back to the conversation about earnings frequency, but also I know that you're in conversation with the SEC chair frequently. What are you discussing that could address that issue and potentially allow companies to go public while still focusing on that growth and that product growth?
Yeah, we've had conversations with Chair Atkins pretty much since the beginning of the year when he was identified. And one of the things we've heavily advocated for is glide paths for IPOs for newly public companies in terms of disclosures, in terms of how they act as a public company. Again, though, not taking away from the transparency. We think transparency is the hallmark of what makes our capital markets the greatest markets in the world. So we don't want to take away from that pure transparency around how the business is operating.
And something that I wrote about in this morning's newsletter was the president's war on transparency. That's what some of my sources are calling it with regards to this earnings conversation, but then also the attempted firing of a Fed governor. A BLS report that was supposed to come out this week was pulled. What are you hearing from executives you speak with about doing business, doing deals under this administration, given some of the transparency challenges?
Many of the CEOs I talk to are incredibly optimistic. If you look at the deals that have been done, remember the past administration, it was challenged to do mergers and acquisitions. The M&A environment was very challenged under the previous administration. At various times, the market was also challenged. There were questions around interest rates. We just saw an interest rate cut. So CEOs tend to be optimistic at the moment, cautiously optimistic, though, particularly when they balance the considerations associated with tariffs as they did earlier this year. So I would say overly optimistic in the beginning of the year, then a little bit of caution came in the second quarter, and now we're back to optimism.
Well, and to your point, we've been talking about IPOs coming back for years.
Absolutely.
And now they're finally coming back. So
absolutely. This quarter has
been
tremendous in terms of IPOs. And the market really felt like it was open from the beginning of the year with that pause around April that we all understood pretty well. But then if I look at the deals that started to go around Memorial Day, that's when we really saw the market bust open, for lack of a better description. That's when we saw companies like Circle come to market. And then after the quarterly financials were updated, man, it's been off to the races since the end of July with Nielsen IQ and Figma and StubHub and Klarna and some really notable names going public on the New York Stock Exchange just in the last few weeks.
Yeah. Some of those names, though, you mentioned Figma, huge pops right after earnings, especially because of retail investor involvement, and then they've come in quite a bit. Is there any risk of some of these companies having a little bit too easy of a glide path to going public going forward, or do you think that we are way too far away from that?
I think we are way too far away from that. I think investors will ultimately be the ones to govern what needs to be disclosed and how frequently that needs to be disclosed. And every good CEO and CFO is going to be responsive to their shareholders.
And on that end too, I talk to a lot of companies like Public, like Robinhood, who talk a lot about how executives are going to them before they IPO and saying, we want retail investors at the table. What are you hearing about that
Absolutely,
access?
and you saw particularly in some of the crypto IPOs, you look at a company like Bullish, which significantly upsized their IPO. I think they had a 20% retail allocation, which was the highest of its time because of the demand they're seeing from retail to invest in, to gain exposure to that asset class.
What does that signal to you about Wall Street's acceptance of retail? Are they not the dumb money anymore?
I think retail is an incredibly positive trend for investing. It means people are becoming more and more educated, getting better tools at their disposal, and making smart decisions about where to put their money for the long term and betting on the future of American listed businesses. So I tend to think it's a positive trend.
And to that end, in terms of long-term investment, we've also seen the president pushing for more access to private investment allocation in people's retirement funds and 401ks. How do you think about that? Is that a competing force to public companies?
I think it will depend on the amount of disclosure around those private companies. As long as there is good transparency, which I don't know how that will look,
right.
Then I think it's a positive trend because that's when the companies are really in hyper growth but have a very different risk profile when they're private versus when they're public. But again, it does come down to transparency.
Right.
And does mom and pop actually have transparency into the financials of the company that is private?
And to the point you were making earlier, it makes me think about the degree to which some of these retail investors will have an equal seat at the table when you have Wall Street analysts who may have ways of getting access to company information more frequently. Is that something that you would be concerned about or that retail investors have mentioned to you that they're concerned about when it comes to
I think the way some of the public companies have incorporated retail into their earnings calls has been incredibly interesting. You look at a company like Reddit, who had a very successful IPO in 2024, and can't think of a more retail-focused business than Reddit. And they did an allocation to retail at their IPO. They've taken questions from retail as part of their earnings call. So I think it just shows that there is a seat at the table for those types of investors.
As we get to the end here, I want to end on something just super light and easy, which is whether or not the stock market is heading towards a massive AI bubble and potential
Right, that's
decline.
such an easy question. Wow.
So we have 90 seconds left. Just wondering, yes or no? Pop, no pop? No pressure. Any thoughts? Any thoughts? Valuations, very stretched.
You know what? I think it's a consideration with what you mean about stretch. Now you look at some of the names that have more recently capitalized on AI tailwinds. It's actually starting to broaden out to the entirety of the ecosystem. You look at Oracle. You look at some of the energy companies, because where is the demand for compute going to come from? It's going to be fueled in the data centers. You need power in a data center. So I think a broadening out of AI and the theme of AI has been very healthy for the markets. It's not just a couple of companies that are susceptible or focused on AI. It's a much broader ecosystem.
Absolutely. Lynn, thank you so much.
Thank
really
you.
appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome. Please welcome Axios Live moderator and host, Hope King.
Hello, everyone. It's so great to be here. Happy fall, by the way. Today's the first day of autumn. It's equal daylight and equal nighttime. So for those who care about that kind of thing, which I obviously do, I'm so happy and I'm so pleased to host this next conversation. And the reason is because there is so much going on, and this particular executive has the insights that y'all need to know. They are also, very importantly, the sponsor of tonight's evening. Without further ado, please welcome KPMG U.S. Deputy Chair and U.S. Managing Principal Atif Zaim. Welcome. So good to be with you. When we were chatting ahead of today, I just marveled at the fact that we have very similar jobs in some ways. We talk to executives, you're in boardrooms, you go a step further and you advise. I'm here to listen, but I would love for you to start just by sharing with what you've been hearing in those boardrooms and to answer this question, which it's been on a lot of people's minds this year: is US exceptionalism still alive?
Great question, Hope. Thank you for having me here. One of the best parts of my job is really that, having the opportunity to be in boardrooms, talking to the C-suite, and really getting a taste for what's going on in corporate America. And the reason that's relevant to this conversation is while governments, people in general, educational institutions obviously impact the competitiveness or otherwise of an economy, businesses play a really large role. They play a really large role in developing many of the technologies that make progress happen, and they play a big role in adopting those technologies to turn it into productivity gains. So coming back to your question, 100% the US exceptionalism is alive and well. And you just have to look at, we're home to Silicon Valley. We have the deepest and most liquid capital markets. We're just here talking about that. We have a reasonably stable, yes, it goes up and down at times, but if you look at it, reasonably stable regulatory system. We're a democracy. The regulatory burden isn't as high as in many other places around the world. So for all of those reasons, it remains very attractive. But the biggest reason, in my mind at least, is we have, as a society, a very different stigma attached to failure. Compared to many other countries. And in the startup culture, or in the ecosystem, it can even be seen as a badge of honor, right? It's about the learnings and the growth you experienced through a failure on the way to a longer journey towards success. Listen, it's not an accident that Gen AI was invented here, right? So.
Yeah, well, the fail fast mentality is a startup one that is very much accepted. I grew up in corporate. That was not how I was raised, to be able to fail fast. And for enterprises especially, there's so much pressure on the CapEx, ROI, especially 3 years post ChatGPT launch. From what you've seen, what tends to be the turning point that actually moves leaders into a different state of mind on risk taking, especially at an enterprise level, maybe beyond the startup size?
Yeah, listen, for an established business, a large corporation, you do not have the same ability to fail as a startup might, right? You have to make sure that you're fulfilling the orders of your customer, protecting the data of your customers and your employees, and all those sorts of things. But does that mean that you don't experiment? Does that mean that you don't innovate and take some calculated risk? No, I don't believe it does. So I'll give you our own example. We believe with AI that a lot of the innovation is going to come from bottom up, and our organization is no exception. So one of the things that we did early on is to make sure our employees had access to a controlled environment with the right AI tools so they could experiment. We combined that with the right training to them around the do's and don'ts using our trusted AI framework to make sure that they're experimenting but with the right guardrails. I was having a conversation with the CEO and he was talking about, hey, how do I get my team, my organization to be more innovative, to do more experiments? And my advice was, listen, it comes down to what do you celebrate? And what do you reward? And really, there's no doubt that a huge successful experiment gets rewarded and everyone, you're up on the stage and you're getting the Employee of the Year award and all that sort of stuff. But really, what happens if you experiment and it didn't quite get you all the way there? Are you trying to get, how do you get those sorts of activities incentivized within your organization?
I'm gonna make my next LinkedIn post about a failure and see how many likes I get. You mentioned this at the beginning, which is that there's relative volatility right now with the regulatory environment here in the U.S., but still relatively stable compared to the rest of the world. But as you heard Lynn say, as you've been listening to executives in boardrooms, the optimism has been fluctuating. Mm-hmm. So I guess just to really end this conversation a little bit more on a finite basis, can you share some more examples of this in practice? Because the idea of experimentation, I think everybody wants to, but when the regulatory environment changes within a day, it can be very hard to figure out which direction do I experiment in this particular hour.
Yeah, so I think a couple of ways to answer that question, Hope. So one of the things I'll tell you is, again, on our travels and working with our clients and advising them, we're beginning to see the very first proof points. So software coding as an example, significant productivity enhancements using new technology, so you could do it faster, you could do it cheaper, and the results are better than they would have been otherwise. So you're seeing that. You're seeing certain entire processes being automated, and again, you're delighting the customers because you could do it much faster. So you're starting to see that, and I will say, adoption is one of the hardest things people do, right? And because it requires change in human behavior. So we'll take a minute. This is something that probably isn't absolutely, it has to have the ROI, and it will have the ROI. It just may not be this quarter or next quarter.
The other thing that I love that you said to me before this was, don't let headlines mislead you away from the resilience of the systems. What did you mean by that? Where are the fundamentals of business operations in the US still strong?
So listen, the headlines, there's enough written and said about that, and I don't really have a lot to add on that topic, not net new to add on that topic. But I will tell you, if you look below the headlines and see what's actually going on, we were just talking about the cautious optimism with the CEOs. We see exactly the same thing. If you look at the deal market, so on cross-border in particular, to talk about U.S. as a destination, $150 billion in cross-border M&A in the deals in the first half of this year, way more than last year or the year before that. So you're seeing that happen. Yes, deals did freeze a little bit in April earlier this year because of the tariff and trade policy uncertainty. But as that lifted, June, July, and August, just amazing months for the deal market. So you can see that you're seeing it in the data, and you can see that it remains strong. The economy remains strong.
I think one of the challenges right now for all business leaders is to square the hard data from the sentiment, the soft data. Is there a right way for leaders to navigate that gap? Because for the most part, business leaders have to be quite optimistic all the time in order to be creative and find solutions.
Yeah, and I will say, you shouldn't do anything if you're not going to get a return on it. Absolutely, you should do that. But you should also ask the question, so that question often, so the return question often comes in, hey, can we afford to do this? Mm-hmm. Is the cost worth the return that we're going to get on it? But you should also ask the question, can we afford not to do it? With the new technology and the disruption that's coming, it's business models that are being disrupted, it is delivery models that are being changed, and can you really afford to sit back and say, hey, we'll wait and see? So every conversation I have, most of the folks are investing. If you look at some of the surveys that we do, like 85% of the banking respondents to our banking survey are basically investing in AI. That's their top investment area, et cetera. So you have to do that, and the return will come.
And if everybody's experimenting, I think then it's a safe environment for everyone.
That's right.
Can be celebrating their failures as well. We're at the end of our conversation, so I want to end with a question about year-end. Planning is underway now for a lot of companies for year-end for next year. What are you hearing out there?
So AI is the number one still. Trade and tariffs is a reasonable one. It's some of the survey that we did, 50% of the respondents are reconfiguring the supply chains. It takes 7 to 12 months to do that, so that's going to stay on their radar for a while here yet. And then the last thing is, very interesting topic, we could have had a whole discussion on this, is workforce of the future. Starting to think about what would your workforce look like, and what skills will they have, and how do you enhance and enable those skills?
Yeah, you can't just throw technology at things. People still have to.
It's going to be a very different way of working with technology in the future than it has been up until now.
Well, I look forward to that conversation, Atif. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thank you, Hope.
Thank you for making this possible.
Put your hands together for senior economics reporter Courtney Brown.
Hello, everyone. Perfect walk-on music for me. I'm Courtney Brown, senior economics reporter at Axios. I write the daily newsletter Axios Macro. I know you guys know that already because you all subscribe, right? So tonight we're going to be talking about, as we have been, a theme that is the through line in almost every single story I've reported over the past few months. We have never lived in a world in which America wasn't the bedrock of the global financial system, but we see very clearly that there is a shift happening. So let's welcome someone who has been sounding the alarm, talking about this question a lot, Rebecca Patterson from the Council on Foreign Relations. Okay, Rebecca, ask me what I did for lunch today.
What did you do for lunch today?
I spent my lunch hour at the Economic Club of New York listening to the new Fed governor, Stephen Miron, and he laid out his case for why interest rates should be significantly lower than they are now. And he said, it's not political, but here's all my reasoning. And so I want to know, do you believe that it is not political?
No.
Okay.
So,
Go.
so Governor Miron is a PhD economist. He's very bright. He's very qualified. His initial remarks as a Fed governor today, I thought were very thoughtful. He cited very good, credible sources. He had done his homework. That's not a surprise, and that's what we would expect of a Fed governor. I think some of his assumptions, though, make you wonder about the politics. For example, he was talking about what's called the Fed's neutral rate, or R star. So the rate, the policy interest rate at which it's not too hot or cold, right? We have just right unemployment and inflation mix over the long term. And part of his thinking for why interest rates should be significantly lower than they are today is an assumption that the new fiscal package will reduce the budget deficit meaningfully, which will increase the country's savings rate. He also believes that loans and guarantees from foreign governments for the United States will provide a wave of investment. He also has some views on immigration, for example, that the exodus of immigrants from the United States will bring down inflation significantly, which it will help reduce in the short term rents and housing costs. At the same time, there have been studies by the Peterson Institute, Brookings Institute, the Dallas Federal Reserve. The Dallas Fed's research came out just this July showing that they expect the exodus of immigrants this year to reduce GDP by as much as 0.8%.
Right, you don't have people, you don't have a lot of economic growth.
Correct.
That is the argument.
But
right.
even with that economic drag, they see inflation slightly higher. So Myron might be right, but he's making some assumptions that are hard to wrap your head around unless you also believe those political assumptions.
But this is a big deal. You have spent a lot of time, you were at Bridgewater, you ran a trade desk at JP Morgan. This is a big deal that someone who knows a lot about the financial markets is saying, you don't believe a Fed official is apolitical. So what does that mean for this question we're talking about this evening? You know, is America still the globe's financial safe haven?
So we haven't seen much reaction yet to the possibility of Fed politicization. And I think that's because we still have a lot of things that need to happen before we get there. Stephen Miron being on the Fed while he's also just on a leave of absence from the CEA, the Council of Economic Advisors, is unprecedented and
Still keeping his job at the White House.
Correct.
Also serving as
Correct. So that's not a great step for an independent central bank. But remember, the central bank sets rates by a vote, and you need 7 voters to get a rate change. And so he's just one vote. Now, I think the thing we need to worry about if Governor Lisa Cook, who President Trump is trying to fire because of an alleged mortgage fraud, which has not been proven yet, if she were to leave her seat and President Trump could appoint another person, so then you have 2, Waller and Bowman, 2 other governors appointed by President Trump, they voted with a consensus this time. It's not clear that they're just going to do what the administration wants. But then you'd have 4. if you have 4 of the 7 governors next February, when all the regional Fed presidents are reviewed, they're reviewed every 5 years, and it just happens to be this coming February, then those 4 governors, if they so chose, could remove some presidents.
So we're talking about a massive overhaul of the world's most important central bank, putting potentially officials in place who all support lowering interest rates.
So there is a path, a small path, but there is a path that by next May, when Chairman Powell steps down, his term will end, and a replacement is chosen by the president, has to get Senate confirmation.
Sure.
There is a small path that would lead us to a Fed with a majority of voting members who would be biased towards supporting the government's priorities. That's the risk, but you can see there's so many steps before we get there. To me, it makes sense that the markets aren't freaking out yet.
I look at you write from time to time for the New York Times. I look under your byline, and it is just, it's not for the weak. Some headlines. It's just
I don't write the headlines.
Okay, fair. But I do think, let me just read a few. It
Okay.
gives a good idea of where you sit, maybe. Here's one. If you like 35% inflation, go ahead and fire the Fed chair. That's one. American debt is officially tarnished. And finally, the sagging dollar will usher in a world of pain. Okay, so now you have to tell me what you're optimistic about.
Okay, you want to talk optimism? Sure,
Please.
let's do that. Let's
Please.
do that. All right.
What
so,
makes you confident about America's position in the world?
Well, I think there are real risks to our position in the world. The headlines I don't write, and I do think they get a little sensationalized, so I don't love them. But the points are still valid, and it is what I believe directionally. I'm worried because of immigration, innovation, and institutions. Immigration because at the end of the day, GDP is comprised of labor and productivity. The more workers we have, the more output we have. The more productivity, the more you get per worker. If we have an exodus of immigrants, we're going to have less labor. They make up 20% of the labor force today. And native-born workers, that labor force is shrinking because women are having fewer kids. So we need immigrants, and that's going to be a problem if we lose them. So that's point one. And it's not just the illegal immigrants or unauthorized immigrants. I'm sure you all saw the news about the H-1B visas today, which are for skilled immigrants. Now we're charging $100,000 for those folks to come into the States. We need them. Meanwhile, China, as of October 1st, is having a new K visa, which will make it more attractive for skilled workers to go to China.
Is the optimism coming?
It's coming.
Okay, all right, just checking.
I'm heading there, I'm heading
Okay.
there. All right.
I know you'll get there.
And I'll make it tighter. So we have immigration, innovation, we just need to be careful because innovation is a function of these skilled workers who are American-born and foreign-born. It's also a function of R&D, which starts in universities, and that funding has gotten slashed. I'm worried about innovation. And then finally, institutions, the Fed is an example, but not the only one. Okay, those are my worries. Optimism. Yeah. I mean, we've heard some of it from previous speakers already, right? We have a great secondary educational system. We have an innovative entrepreneurial culture. We have generally a pretty good regulatory system versus other countries. Physically, the fact that we have 2 bodies of water, we have all these ports, our geography, and the fact that we can produce so many commodities. A lot of countries have to import everything. It makes them much more vulnerable. Right. And I would double down on the previous speaker's comment about our capital markets. This is something I think that's underappreciated. The fact that a household or a business can borrow capital to grow at any point in the business cycle is a big deal. In Europe, something like 70% of loans come from banks. And banks tend to pull back when the cycle goes down, when the economy is softening. And so it's much harder for people to borrow and grow. In the United States, someone's always going to loan you money. You might not like the price, but it's going to be available. And that's an important thing that helps us outgrow our peers over time. So the technology, the R&D, the workers lead to the innovation, the capital markets and the innovation lead to these giant tech companies today that are honestly dominating the world. So I think there is still a lot of reason for optimism, but I don't think we should be shy about calling out the risks.
Yeah. So a little bit of the audience can take away something they should be concerned about, and a few things they can be optimistic about as well. I asked the source last week what makes America still, even with everything that we've just talked about, what makes it the best place in the world to invest and, keep your money safe. And he said, in short, well, where else are you going to go?
Yeah.
Does that make you feel good about America's future?
I mean, it's not.
We're still the best.
It's factually correct, right? Our U.S. Treasury market, the market cap is $28 trillion. To put that in context, Germany's is about 8, right? If Europe could get political consensus to harmonize all of its bond markets, it would be roughly the same size as America's. And then you would have somewhere else to go that would have the same depth and liquidity as our market. But politically, it's probably not going to happen anytime soon, maybe ever. So you're right. For now, there's not really anywhere else to go. But I'll tell you the canary in the coal mine, the thing that I'm looking at that's saying people are really scared, because you don't see it in the equity market. We're near all-time highs.
Definitely.
You don't see it in the bond market, right? The 10-year is up a little, but you see it in gold prices. Gold has rallied 43% just so far this year. Central banks in the last 3 years have bought more than 1,000 tons of gold a year. That's double the pace of the previous decade. Retail investors globally are buying more gold.
So whereas maybe they would have bought the U.S. dollar, which has seen dramatic
The
declines.
dollar, U.S. fixed income, et cetera,
They're going
people
up.
are hedging their risk. And you see that, I think, better than anything else in gold.
Interesting. We just have a little over a minute left.
All right,
and I
shorter. Okay, I got it. Go.
We are ladies who love to talk, and I can't wait to keep talking. Anyway, I want to ask you how you would explain to a Rebecca Patterson who's just starting her career on Wall Street, what would you struggle to explain to her, given everything that's happening in the world right now? What would she just not understand?
Oof. There's so much. Okay. Yeah, you can't do that to me with a minute to go. That's not fair. How can a country that's so smart and have so much going for it not have the political will to make good long-term decisions? The fact that our debt to GDP is 100% and is on track to be 120% in the next decade, we're going to leave that debt burden to our kids and grandkids. And yet, we elect politicians who are only going to cut taxes for us. God forbid we raise taxes or cut spending on something to balance our budget. It's a country of very short-term, I'd honestly say selfish thinking people. And we're all looking out for ourselves instead of our community and our future generations. If there's one thing I had to boil down that would make me crazy trying to explain to my kids, have fun with that. From an economics point of view, there's lots we could talk about, but from an economics point of view, that would be it.
Yeah, I think you wouldn't be alone. I hear the worries on Wall Street among my sources about the nation's debt and it potentially reaching a breaking point very soon.
And Greenspan said it was at a breaking point in the 1980s. This is not a new worry.
This is true.
But what's different now is that it is significantly higher. The interest on our debt is now 15% of all government spending, and foreigners who own 30% of the debt don't trust us anymore.
Right.
They're part of the reason gold prices are going up. So the problem isn't a Liz Truss moment. I'm referring to the UK, where the prime minister had to resign shorter than the time a lettuce wilts. But we're not that. But directionally, that's where we're headed if someone doesn't take a politically courageous stance.
On that note, Rebecca Patterson, everyone. Thank you so much.
Introducing to the stage, Axios co-founder, Mike Allen.
Coming out tonight in this amazing setting. Axios in January will be 9 years old, and we started with 3 people and a whiteboard. And so we so appreciate all the people in this room, all your teams who've believed in Axios, who've helped with us. and who have believed in us over the years. We thank our partner KPMG for tonight. They're on the cutting edge of technology. I've had a good time talking to their team and have just had an amazing time being a little touristy with the views out of this amazing building. So thank you for these great conversations. You can see why we're so proud of the Axios journalists, the Axios experts who you've seen up here, who have such great coverage, led by the Axios executive editor, Kate Marino, who is here. So really appreciate everything. I love this week. We have Climate Week, UNGA Week. I've been coming up here since I covered George W. Bush, and it's always a week to think big and to think down the road. And so that's what we're doing tonight with our conversation with Jeremy Allaire, who's the CEO of Circle. It's a stablecoin company, and Jeremy has seen it all. He has been deep in the web for 35 years. And I misspoke because he corrected me. 35 years ago, there wasn't a web, there was an internet. So he's been deep in the internet for 35 years. He's had 3 IPOs, which many people in this room will appreciate. First, he and his relative built the infrastructure company for building the internet. Second, digital media. Third, digital money. Circle, the new shape of money. Jeremy Allaire, welcome to Axios.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely.
We appreciate it. So you mentioned something to me backstage that I think tells a really big story about the industry and about our time. So Circle just moved, and Circle now, a stablecoin company, is now at One World Trade Center on the 87th floor is your global headquarters. Like, what does that signal, and what's the reality of that?
Yeah, I think as a company whose kind of primary ambition is to upgrade the financial system to fully operate on the internet, and whose principal major product today is a digital dollar that is at the core of that upgrade to how the internet integrates and in turn evolves the financial system. There's no better place in the world than New York City. There's no better place in the world than, frankly, One World Trade Center, which kind of towers above this infrastructure here that is literally the databases that run the dollar at the New York Fed, the capital of capital markets with the New York Stock Exchange, the core infrastructure that is the infrastructure that's been here in the electronic era of money, but now we're moving entirely into an internet era, the financial system. So for us, that's important. I think also there's some symbolism to Freedom Tower, and I think a belief that the architecture of the internet financial system should enshrine American values, should enshrine liberal market values, and I think that's what we're seeing.
So you're a New Yorker for 3 weeks.
That's right. Well, the company's been here officially since 2024, but personally, yes, a few weeks, yeah.
So stablecoin 101. People come to you not for appreciation, but for stability. And one way to say it is that in your business, boring is good.
That's exactly right. I mean, the fundamentals are you give us traditional electronic dollars, and we hold it in the safest possible way, which is U.S. government treasuries, overnight repo with large global banks, and we issue a digital dollar that can use the internet's utility, that can kind of move at the speed of the internet. And so the last thing you want is something that is not a dollar. You want it to always be a dollar. You can always create it for a dollar, redeem it for a dollar, and it functions as a unit of account that is a dollar, but all around the world on the internet.
And use cases, we were having a glass of water, very adventuresome, before this. And while we were having those wild glasses of water, you drew a Visa analogy for me.
Yeah, so just in thinking about Circle, we're like a market-neutral infrastructure company. So we build this infrastructure. We build the kind of financial market infrastructure that plugs what we do into the major banking systems all around the world. So the major financial market centers around the world. And then we build the technology that runs on the internet, kind of public infrastructure on the public internet that allows these digital dollars to operate around the world. And what we do is we make that infrastructure available. You don't come to me, you don't come to Circle and say, I want USDC. You go to thousands of companies around the world, whether those are wallet companies, exchanges, brokerages, consumer payment applications, neobanks, banks, others, who then make it available to you. In the same way with Visa, like you don't actually have an account with Visa. You have an account with Chase, or you have an account with someone else who issues on the Visa network. And so our main product, USDC, is distributed, and reaches well over 600 million users through accounts around the world, but it's generally available on the public internet. So as an end user, you can hold it, transact it, make peer-to-peer transactions or wholesale transactions, any kind of transaction with it. But we're there as the infrastructure to enable that for financial institutions and developers who are building software on the internet that needs dollars.
So the internet meets global finance. We talked a little bit about internet epics. Like sort of walk us through where we are and what you've lived through.
Yeah, I mean, if as you noted, thank you, I've been working on internet infrastructure for 35 years. And I think what was notable when I first got involved in the internet 35 years ago was even then, it was an open network. Not everyone could access it yet. It wasn't commercialized yet, but it was an open network built on open protocols that were technically specified, where anyone who had a computer who could connect to that could then directly interact with anyone else, whether that's for a software, for communications, for information publishing. And that was really revolutionary, this kind of open, permissionless network that then provided infrastructure layers through protocols. That's a little technical jargon speak, I realize. But that's played itself out over multiple epochs. In the first epoch, we created another layer, which was for the structuring and exchange of information. That was the web. And then we created another layer, which allowed you to interact through the web, which allowed for apps through web browsers. And that unlocked things like commerce on the internet. And then we built new layers for things like voice and video on the internet. And so we got digital media, and we got those kinds of platforms. And in each of these epochs, and they're really characterized oftentimes by major new internet scale platforms and utilities that emerge that kind of take what you had in the existing world and effectively make it globally available, frictionless, and nearly free, if not free altogether. So radically change the unit economics of those utilities, whether it was, we don't have long distance calls, we have a very different relationship to media. We have access to software in ways we don't get CDs and install them on computers anymore. So we've restructured it, through these utilities, distribution, unit economics, the product experience, et cetera. And in each of these epochs, I think about that DNA of the internet, open networks, open protocols, open software, decentralized infrastructure as colliding with an industry. And it collides and morphs and transforms that industry. And right now, I think really 2025 is a really important marker year for this. Right now, that open architecture of the internet, through blockchain network infrastructure, through the introduction of innovations like stablecoins, is colliding with the global financial system. And that's the biggest market that the internet has ever collided with, by far. And so the implications, I think, are very profound and very long-term. I've been doing this 12 years at Circle. I think of Circle as a very early stage company. We've barely done anything. And so I think we've got decades ahead. There's a lot of exciting things to be built. And that's because our concept of what economic activity is on the internet will be very, very different in the future from what we can even imagine today.
Now, Jeremy, the why it matters of this epic, and a lot of you are Axios readers. The reason that our smart brevity architecture and the team led by Kate Marino singles out why it matters is to show you, our valuable reader, that we've done the work, that I came up through newspapers, and a lot of times there was a missing sentence in the story. Why it matters is that missing sentence. In this case, the why it matters is continued dominance of the dollar and increasing U.S. competitiveness.
Well, I think for dollar stablecoins in particular, I think that's the case. For the more general technology, I think it affects everyone, everywhere, equally, irrespective of what your currency is. And so I view the broader why it matters is we want to build an economic system that allows people to participate more easily, that lowers friction, that increases trust, reduces risk, increases economic velocity, creates more opportunities for prosperity. That's the big picture why. I think with dollar stablecoins, very specifically, dollar stablecoins can play a crucial role. I mean, we've been talking to leaders in the US government and in Congress for about 5 years about this. And our belief is that dollar stablecoins can enshrine the dollar as the primary currency of the internet. It can turn digital dollars into a major export product of the United States. It can cement that role in markets around the world where there is currency competition and there's increasing currency competition. And it can unlock a technology innovation wave. If done correctly, I think with the right regulatory structures, it can unleash a competitive free market as well and allow that technology innovation to compound and flourish, as opposed to, say, centrally planned systems that are built and run by the government. And so that's taking American values, American capitalism, technology, innovation, entrepreneurship, and the dollar and the strength of the dollar, which despite the last discussion, which I think is dour on the dollar, and there are reasons to be dour on the dollar as effectively the debt worthiness of the United States, the credit worthiness of the United States, as a defense and offense mechanism, I think it's a very powerful one.
A big theme of Axios coverage is how New York and DC are moving closer together. DC and Silicon Valley are moving closer together. The way one person put it to me, just the change in DC, is they said you can walk into any room and there's a deal being done. And clearly you have a very friendly climate in DC at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that has not been the case for the last 12 years. I testified to the Senate for the first time 12 years ago, in November, actually, of 2013. And I have been making the case in DC for that long that we need regulation over this industry. And that the only way we're going to unlock the possibility of taking the existing system and upgrading it into this new system is with regulation. And so we have been working towards that for a very long time. And in fact, prior to this election, the Congress was actually very close to passing a stablecoin bill, as it was previously referred. And I think it got held up because the election was happening, and I think whoever won was likely to get that on the scoreboard pretty early in the presidency. I will say this administration, at the technical level, the Treasury Department, the SEC, the CFTC, the Federal Reserve, and others have prioritized providing a clear pathway and new rules and regulations around this technology. I think that's a very positive development. But I should say, and I think you maybe are going to turn to this next, is this isn't just a partisan issue. This is highly bipartisan. It was bipartisan before the election. It remains highly bipartisan. The Genius Act, which passed in July, is the first and only major piece of bipartisan legislation passed in this Congress, maybe the only major piece of bipartisan legislation passed in this Congress. 70 votes in the Senate, over 300 votes in the House, broad bipartisanship, and it reflects the fact that I think broadly people understand the importance of this technology and what this can be for the United States. And so while there has been an administration that has leaned into this, this is a set of issues that is nonpartisan as far as I'm concerned.
When President Trump signed the Genius Act in July, he's always given to understatement. He said this would allow the U.S. to lead the global digital currency revolution, and you're a big part of that.
We're doing our part. I mean, I think we've built a great company here in the United States, here in New York, and I think the next 10 years there's going to be a huge amount of development in this space. I actually think right now the United States is potentially, as a result of this administration and the bipartisan efforts in Congress, is going to be the best place in the world to build and compete in this. I look at this, going back, you probably remember the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which was a big bipartisan bill. There were several bills actually that passed with strong bipartisanship, which got the commercialization of the internet to happen, created a basic set of rules around net neutrality, allowed kind of free access in different ways to a commercialized internet. And that unleashed a huge amount of entrepreneurship. And so I think there's opportunities here in the economic system, not just the information services revolution.
Luis is about to give us the hook, but one question I want to sneak in. You personally are a big use of ChatGPT as a collaborator. How is AI going to transform, disrupt your industry?
Well, it's having an impact just in terms of how we operate and operate as companies, just as anyone else. But I think it is also becoming a critical piece of how stablecoins are going to be used. In fact, last week, Google rolled out in their agent-to-agent system adoption of stablecoins and actually a standard for AI use of stablecoins that we were a co-author of. And so agentic payments and stablecoins are kind of made for each other. And so my own belief is that in the future, the vast majority of economic activity will be intermediated by AI, and the vast majority of the money that moves will be actually stablecoin money.
And as we say goodbye, something that you personally are very disciplined about is mindfulness. And we're chatting a little bit about that. And something you're big on is being present. And I could use some help with that. What's your number one hack for being present?
You know, I think there's intention. You need intentionality to be present.
I'm good with the intention. But
That's good. So I think intentionality, breathing, and obviously setting things aside that are going to get in the way of that.
And what do you do to keep yourself and others off of your phone?
Put it away.
Do you literally do that?
Yeah, it's in my pocket.
Touche. Well, thank you. We're about to have some cocktails over here. We appreciate all of you coming out. Look forward to visiting and connecting. Thank KPMG for a long partnership with Axios and for making these conversations possible. Incredible Axios events team, which did a whole Axios house in Midtown earlier today. They did an AI summit and a media summit last week. They're amazing. The people in this room who are making beautiful food and beverages for us, so we appreciate them. So please stay, connect, network. Thank you from Axios, and thank you, Jeremy Lawyer, for a great conversation.
Thank you, Mike.
See you on Axios.
All right.